We've reached the afternoon and we're at stop 3 on our virtual tour. Hope you've been enjoying where we've been so far. Where we've moved to is the northern side of that big Wairau Valley that I was talking about earlier, into the higher rainfall hill country that formerly was farm, but in the 1960s and 70s it was identified as having potential for pine forests. And at the time in the 1970s, the local councils formed the Marlborough Regional Forests as a group to invest in pine forestry and bought this land, and it was planted. So in 2003, I was able to approach Marlborough Regional Forests to discuss the opportunity of planting trials of some of the new species that we'd identified for the possibility to produce vineyard posts. One of those was Eucalyptus persistuana, and this tree right beside me is a specimen from the small stand that we planted back then in 2003. Today the trees are 18 years old, and we can now see the provenance. In other words, what is the genetics and how good was that Central Coast seed lot, because it was unimproved, basically straight out of the forest over in Australia, collected by a seed collector, gone to the nursery to produce the seedlings that were then established to create the stand. It's a fine example of an unimproved seed lot, mainly because it shows a huge variety of both growth and form, and that if you were to look at the wood properties, you would also find a lot of variation. Okay, let's have a look at some of the variation that I've just talked about. This tree here on the right, this would be a top tree. It's an elite tree is what we'd call it if it was in one of our collections for breeding. It's gun barrel straight. I haven't measured the height, but it's well in excess of 20 metres. It's got reasonably good branching, and it's relative to the other trees, it's already got a good diameter. As I've said, we don't know what the hardwood properties are like, but if we were able to take a call, we could find that out. If we were looking for candidates in a breeding program and we were starting to make some new selections, we actually could take seed from this tree and introduce it now into our breeding program, because we do know its provenance. By comparison, this tree here, while it demonstrates excellent productivity because its diameter is similar in size or even larger than the tree that we've just looked at, unfortunately its lower bole is sinuous or wobbles, it's not straight, and then once you get above where the pruning finished, there's a major fork to the stem, and that repeats itself further up, and that replication of forking up the stem is a genetic trait that we want to eliminate, and so this tree would be excluded from the breeding program and would be thinned out of, and entirely that family, if it's family related, which is what we learn, then these are the types of trees that we rogue out of the breeding population. This stand was planted actually in a small, what was formerly a paddock, a grassed area. It hadn't been previously planted, so the area was spot sprayed prior to planting and established. Generally in spring, you plant eucalypts in spring, especially on a flatter site like this where you can get frosts later on in the season. And it was planted at a reasonably high stocking. The intention was to set it up with the potential to be able to grow some vineyard posts, as we've discussed at the vineyard, and to give us an early indication as to whether Eucalyptus persistuana was a suitable species, both for growing in these types of environments as well as then to process into posts. The management by Marlborough Regional Forests has been excellent. They've come in and undertaken the initial operation, would have included some form pruning on most trees to tidy them up, because a lot of unimproved Eucalyptus persistuana has double leaders and forks, and it's a pretty ugly tree, and can be. And then following on from that, they would have done some thinning, to open the stand up and provide more light and room for some of the better trees to grow. And then they've pruned most of the trees up to at least 4 metres, some of them up to potentially about 6 metres. And so there's some good clearwood butt logs that are on some of the larger trees. You can see they're already under development. So that pruning or that silvicultural treatment has the stand now where we've got a mix of some larger, better formed stems. You can see that one standing in the light over there, as well as there's some stems which have got some major imperfections, a twist and the like, but there may be some reasonable straight logs further up that stem. The stand, as I've said, is well managed, and it really, the opportunity it presents is to be managed in two ways. One would be to come in and undertake a full harvest, and some of the trees would go into vineyard posts. Some of the larger trees could be peeled, go to peeler logs, and be part of developing a high strength LVL business. Or alternatively, because it's a flat site and there's easy access, thinning of all of the smaller trees as well as some of the larger trees, and leaving the very best trees to grow on for large saw logs is another opportunity. We've moved up the Pukaka Valley to another part of the Marlborough Regional Forests, and you can probably hear in the background there's a machine working that's cleaning up following a recent pine harvest, which is spread out on the flats here in front of me. But where I want you to look is onto the lower slopes and behind, and you can see that there's a mixed trial here planted in 2005 by Marlborough Regional Forests in collaboration with Vineyard Timbers, when we were already identifying some key species that we thought had a real opportunity to be grown, not just in some of the better sites where we've been, the Eucalyptus persistuana there growing on river flats where it's very fertile, but also species that would grow up onto the slopes, and the soil is a lot poorer, especially in this Pukaka Valley. And so on our right hand side over to this area is Eucalyptus quadrangulata. In the middle of the stand, the lighter colour, and the smaller, spindlier trees, they are persistuana, not growing as well as they were on the flats in the other site that we saw, but they're still surviving nonetheless. And then over to the left-hand side is Eucalyptus globoidea. Being able to work with Marlborough Regional Forest was important in that we were able to investigate what was required to convert from a cut-over pine forest to a eucalypt forest. And this Pukaka Valley, it had been planted in the late 1970s, and so at the time that we were investigating these species in 2003, 2004, these slopes above us were being harvested. By working with Phil Woodward from Marlborough Regional Forests, we used the same approach to site preparation that he was already using for preparing the site after harvest to replant in pines. The cut-over area can be sprayed with metsulfuron, and following a stand-down period of 6 months, you can then be planting straight into that area with pines. Or, in our case, we were able to plant our eucalypt trials. After planting, once again we followed a similar regime to the persistuana that we've just looked at. There was some early form pruning to make sure that the better trees did develop a single leader. The stand was then left for about 5 years before a first pruning lift was undertaken, and then a second pruning lift followed about 18 months after that, because the trees have been pruned up to 5-6 metres in height, and it was thinned down to about, on the balance, 500 stems to the hectare. So while this is a steeper site and more difficult to possibly production thin, the opportunity is still there, because Actually above the stand is a road that joins the main road and runs right above the top of the stand, and we have access along the base of the stand. So an opportunity in the future is production thinning to get polewood for the vineyard posts and grow on the stand for larger saw logs. I think it's a really exciting opportunity that Marlborough forest growers have to look at some of these pine forests within the region, particularly those that are clustered near the Kaituna site that we have identified as a future processing site for a sawmill and a post-peeling mill, and to progressively plant a new resource of hardwood forests for the region, so that we can see these future industries and future generations can benefit from the availability of high quality, durable hardwood.